Ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to focus on two issues, really. First of all, the way in which this has been implemented is inconsistent with good governance. You have a situation here where the valuations that have been implemented have such drastic effects on many sectors of the society and many individuals that it's going to result in a deluge of applications for relief. And I do not believe that the administrative processes are in place to cope with any such deluge. And Senator Fraser-Binns has already spoken to some of the weaknesses in the system from the point of view of the taxpayer, who is faced with a very drastic increase in their property taxes. All of this flows from the poor management of this particular measure being implemented now. The valuations, because there was no review since 2002-03, when it was the last time the valuations were adjusted, the valuation increases are extremely drastic, ranging sometimes to over 1,000%. In looking at that measure, it was necessary for there to be appropriate mitigating steps in the structure of the tax as implemented, so that this would not have such a profound negative impact on so many taxpayers. There should, for example, have been a cap on the increased tax liability of any taxpayer as a result of the implementation of this measure. The cap could have been at 10% on the previous year's liability, or some such whatever percentage it was considered to be reasonable and proportionate. What we have is a totally uncapped situation. So some individuals are facing massive increases, which were not foreshadowed and which they were not expecting. This is poor governance, and it can't work. And I think it's important to note that all of this really flows not from the high valuations, but from the decision of the government to raise an additional $4 billion of revenue in this coming fiscal year from this tax source. Previously, after significant compliance effort on the part of the previous government, collections were brought up to approximately $6 billion per annum. What the government is doing is loading on top of that an additional $4 billion of tax liability, over 60% increase in property taxes overall. And of course, because they've done it in a way that some persons will not be affected, some 200,000 persons, while another 500,000 will be affected. For those who are affected, the increases are even more significant. This is a poor decision, and it all flows from the tax promise that was made in the 2016 February elections to reduce income taxes on certain persons by increasing the threshold to 1.5 million. And they've taken 2 years to implement that. It's created a big fiscal hole which they have to fill. And one way in which they're filling it, apart from all the other tax measures, is to reduce the allocation from central government to local government and put additional burdens on local government to replace that revenue through the property tax system. And I think this is one of the reasons why this particular tax measure is going to be resented so profoundly by those who are negatively impacted by it. Because not only is it totally disproportionate and unreasonable to implement this in the way they have done in a single year, but it all flows from what I would regard as a profoundly dishonest election promise, which has had huge negative impacts on so many people in the society. Ladies and gentlemen, we are calling on the government to roll back the increases, look at this situation again in a balanced way, and avoid the kind of pitfalls and extreme impact that this, as conceived by the government, is having now.